Hello and welcome again to our reading of the Pentacontai from Thucydides, and we're up to chapter 95. And in that very short chapter 94 we were introduced to Pausanias, son of Cleombrotus, who had the generalship of the Greeks on behalf of the Spartans. Now 95 begins Eide de biaiu ontos autu hoi te aloi Hellenes ekthon to kai uk hekista hoi iones kai hosoi apobasileos neosti eleutheron ta. So we begin with the genitive absolute. For already him being violent. So the him, of course, is referring to Pausanias. For he was already showing signs of violence. He was already violent. And the other Greeks, ekthonto, they were vexed, they were upset. Kai uk herkista, and not least the Ionians, and as many as Neosti recently were being freed from Basileus, from king, that is the king of Persia, so from the Persian king. So you can imagine they've been under harsh Persian rule for a long time. They finally freed themselves of that, and then they have this tyrannical ruler of Sparta who is behaving violently towards them. Phoitontes te prostus Athenius exiun autos hegemonas von gignesthai, and then it continues to the next page. So they, this is the allies and perhaps the Ionians, frequently coming, or so frequenting to the Athenians, so frequently coming to the Athenians, they asked them gignesthai to become the leaders of themselves, to become their leaders. Kata to songenes according to their common ancestry. So the Ionians see themselves as culturally and ethnically linked to the Athenians rather than to the Doric Spartans. Kai Pausaniai me epitrepein, and not to hand over power to Pausanias. Apu biasdatai. So if pu in any way, in some respect, biasdatai, he might act violently. So it's almost not to hand it over to Pausanias in case he turned violent. Hoide Athenaioi, and the Athenians edexanto, received literally the words. So this is in the sense of accepted the arguments. And it's interesting here too that Thucydides clearly states that it was the allies who approached the Athenians firstly to take over the leadership. Thucydides makes that very clear here. So the Athenians received their arguments, kai prosekon ten gnomein. This is a variation of that idiom prosekain ton noon, to turn one's mind to, or to have in mind, to give thought to. So here it's something like they turned their attention to, they gave the matter their attention. Hos u periopsomenoi tala te kataste somenoi he phinoito arista autois. Now, hos plus a future participle has the sense of with the intention of, as not intending to overlook the situation. Now, the tala, of course, goes with the next little phrase here, because that te is connective and the ta'ala goes with this. So not intending to overlook, understand the matter, and katastesomenai, and with the intention of establishing or managing tala, the other matters, hey, again this elliptical hey here, in of the way which phanoita optative, it might seem arista best autois to them. So intending not to overlook the situation and to manage the other affairs in a way which appeared best to them. En tutoi dehoi lacedaemonioi metapemponto Pausanian. Meanwhile, the Spartans recalled. This is the middle of metapempo. They sent for, so they recalled Pausanias, anakrinuntes, future participle, with the intention of putting him on trial. From anakrino, and it's a future participle. So with the intention of putting him on trial. Now notice the accent on peri, and it's going with the hone before it, and the antecedent is not there, of course. So regarding those things which epunthanonto, they had, or they were perceiving, it's imperfect here. So they recalled Pausanias with the intention of putting him on trial regarding those things that they were hearing about. Kaiga adikia pole kat egoreto autu hupaton Helenon ton aphiknomenon. For much wrongdoing was being accused of him by the Greeks who were arriving. Kai tyrannidos malon ephinotai mimesis e strategia. Now the subject here is mimesis of the verb, so it's literally an imitation of tyranny was seen more than generalship. So we could perhaps paraphrase that slightly by saying he appeared to be more of an imitation of tyranny, or he showed more of an imitation of tyranny than generalship. Strategia. Xunebe de autoi keleisthai te hama kai tu sumacus toekeno ekthe par Athenius meta taxasthai plain ton apo Peloponnesu stratioton. And it happened for him to be recalled, so it happened that he was recalled, and at the same time also the allies, by their hatred of that man, of Pausanias, metataxasthai, they transferred power to the Athenians, except, of course, those soldiers from the Peloponnesus. Elthon de es lacedaemona ton men idiae prostina adicematon euthunte. Having come into Sparta, now we get tone men and we're going to get ta de here. So the tone is going with the adikematon. Now the main verb here is euthuno, which is a technical word used both in Athens and presumably elsewhere. It means literally to make straight. It's a technical word meaning to call an office bearer to account. So he was called to account for those wrongs done in private, prostina, against someone, but the in a slightly change of construction, we'd expect tone there, but we get tone men and tar there. But Apolluetai, he was acquitted of the greatest charges, but in regard to the greatest charges, he was acquitted as not having done wrong. Categoreto de auto uk hecis de medismos kai edoke saphestaton enai. And not least there was accused of him medism. So medism was accused of him not least. So we would say he was accused not least of medism, and it was seeming to be saphestaton, blatantly obvious, literally most clear. So it was most clear that he was guilty of this. Kai ekenon men uketi ek pempusin akonta. Historic present here, so they send that man no longer out as in charge, archonta, ruling. So the men, and we get a balancing, but understand they sent Dorcas and certain others with him, with a literally not large army, so with having a small army, so with a small army. Typical use of echo in this sense of just translated as with. So they sent out Dorcas and certain others with him, having a small army. Hois uketi aphiasen hoi sumakai tan hegemonian, but the allies no longer handed over to them the leadership. So they no longer gave them the leadership. Hoide astominoi apaelthon. And they, when they realized this, they returned home. Kai alus uketi husteron exepempsan hoi lacedaimonioi. And the Spartans no longer sent out others husteron afterwards. For Bumenoi may, fearing lest hoi exiontes, those going out, gignontai, then the dative of the possessor here, so those going out for them might become worse. Hoper, the very thing also in Adon they saw in Pausanias. So the Spartans were always nervous about sending out their leaders and kings out of the country, because they generally ended up doing things that the Spartans didn't approve of. They much rather have them there at home where they could have control over them via the ephors. So they feared lest those going out might become worse, the very thing which they saw in Pausanias. Apalaxeontes is an interesting form here. It's a desiderative form with this epsilon iota infix here. So it means wishing or desiring. So desiring to separate themselves, to be rid of. So desiring to be rid of the Medic War, the Persian War, the war with the Persians, and Nomizdontes, considering the Athenians to be understood hikonous, sufficient to lead, to take the leadership, literally to lead out, to take the leadership, and understand being, or rather perhaps considering the Athenians to be epiteideus, well, favourable, perhaps well disposed to them, that is to the Spartans. So considering the Athenians to be well disposed to them en tototi paronti, at that present time. That's the end of 95. 96 is fairly short, so we'll do that one as well. paralabontes hoi Athenaioi ten hegemonian. So the Athenians, having taken over the leadership, tuto to tropo, in this way, genitive absolute, with the allies being willing, on account of their misos, their hatred of Pausanias, etaxan has te ede parikain ton polion, cremata pros ton barbaron kai has naus. Now we get an interesting idiom here. This is an example of hyperbaton. We're getting a has and another has down here. And it's feminine because it's agreeing with the polis, of the cities. So it was probably best to take this bit first, as sort of in regard to the cities, they appointed which of the cities it was necessary to provide money against the barbarian, and which ones ships. So that little bit tricky grammar here. The antecedent of the has is coming a bit later. So they appointed those which. So they appointed which of the cities it was necessary to provide cremata money against the barbarians, and which ones, understand, it was necessary to provide ships. And this, of course, became one of the great problems leading up to the problems with the Delian League, was that many of the allies decided to give money rather than ships, and of course the Athenians were quite happy to receive the money. Cremata ein amonestai hon epithon deuntes ten basilea os coran. Now proschema is a pretext. For this was the pretext, amonuestai, normally to defend oneself, but probably here to retaliate. So this was the pretext to retaliate for those things which they had suffered, and they retaliated by deuntas, by ravaging the land of the king. Kai Hellenotamiai. Now this becomes a technical term. These are the so-called stewards of Greece, the Hellenotamiai. It was a new office set up. So at that time, the Hellenotamiai, the stewards of Greece, was the office was established, because this is singular, first for the Athenians, the Hellenotamiai. So we might say the office of Hellenotamiai at that time first was established by the Athenians. Hoi, who edekonta, received ton phoron. Now the word for tribute, as we get in the next line, is phora. So this again becomes a technical word, the phoros. We might call it perhaps here a special tribute or something, to get it into English. Who received the special tribute, the phoros, for thus the tribute of money was named. The first tribute, takthes, having been set, or so it's with ain, it was takthes, it was set at 460 talents. Now this number has been suspect and may have been an assessment rather than what was actually paid, but the allies were keen to give money rather than ships. Tami aeon te delos ein autois. So Delos, this is this little island of Delos, north of Naxos. Delos was for them, Tami aeon, the treasury. Kai hoi xun odoi, and their meetings Gignetot were taking place as Tohiron in the temple, which was on the island. So Delos was set up for them, well, initially, as their treasury, and their common meetings took place in the temple. Now, this treasury was eventually moved from Delos to Athens in 454, much to the annoyance of the allies. And we'll continue with chapter 97 in the next recording.